Hey, Raffaele.
Hey, nice to meet you all, guys. I'm very happy to be with you. How is going in Russia? I mean, we are in a COVID times. It's a pity not to be in Moscow for this conference. I wish we can join and see face to face all together very soon.
Yeah, the same. I hope all this coronavirus madness will be over soon. We
Yeah.
all miss the offline conferences, but I'm so happy that we can still do a conference online and you're still with us. So how it's going on your side?
Yeah. On my side, I mean, it's winter. It's not your kind of winter, of course. And there is a bit of snow close to Genova, but here it's raining right now, and nothing that is, outside of the normal winter times here in my city. At the very end, there is a kind of routine. It's a kind of repeating things every day because with COVID times, every day looks like the same. I mean, it's embarrassing, but apart from my daily work, every morning I ask myself, hey, is it Monday, Tuesday, or what? That's incredible after like 1 year of this kind of life. It feels strange. Anyway, it's working not too bad.
Okay, great. So I'm happy that we can discuss some new features of .NET and C# languages.
Yeah.
And before we can start, a short question. Do we really need all of these updates? I mean, well, there are some enterprise company who still use .NET Framework 3.5 and they are pretty happy with it. So do we really need to invest our time in learning all the new features, all the C#9 syntax, all the new libraries and all of this stuff? Do we really need it?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's not just a way to say it's a great question, but it's really a great question because this is the point of my session. I mean, I follow it closely, all the session in the conference, especially the maths one with C#, but not only, also the other guys. And this is a good it's a good thing that my session came to the very end of the conference because at the very end you may want to understand, okay, that those are details, but what about the general situation? What about the big picture? So I really wanted to collect a list of gems that you can find inside .NET 5, a list of practical things that you may want to apply to your applications and discover what is inside the new framework and understand if it's a word for you or not. And I believe that my session should answer those questions. So I picked a
Awesome.
little bit of many points.
Yeah, so
Good.
let's start.
Okay. And thank you very much to all of you attendees from Moscow, from all the Russia, for being with me. I am very happy to be again with DotNext and all of you. I hope to meet you in person very soon. And my session will talk about .NET 5, of course. So I am Raffaele. You know, I believe you know me already from the previous sessions and the previous editions. And I will skip this slide. I mean, I talked too much about myself. And if you have questions, of course, you can reach me on Twitter, on discussion zone later on. So let's go straight. My editorial pact have a very nice offer for the book that I co-authored about C#8 and .NET Core. Of course, C# 9 it's very new, but if you want to understand the general things, the general trend, you have some doubts and so on, this is a good book, I believe. It's my opinion. And you have a couple of discount codes that you may want to take advantage of. So what's the agenda for today? So how is .NET application development changing? And yes, it is changing, definitely changing, especially if you come from the .NET framework, because there are many things that are happening inside .NET in general. And you already know probably the very big picture. So I don't want to repeat too many details about the fact that .NET, what is now, and .NET Core, .NET Framework, but I will promise to repeat these things in just one slide very soon, and then we will skip all the boring stuff and go straight to the interesting parts, of course. So there are, of course, performance and improvements at various levels, and this is what have given ASP.NET Core, for example, in version 5, the record to be the fastest framework in the web world, according to the official benchmarks that are published from Microsoft, that are, of course, they were performed from third parties. And then also we will talk a little bit about the improvements of the publishing stuff that already began with .NET Core 3 and are continuing in .NET 5. And we will take also a brief look on what's planned for the next, so .NET 6, that is just 1 year from now. The new era has come, and we have heard from Matt Storgesen the very important features of C# 9, but there are many others. Of course, I don't want to spend all the session on C# 9, so I collapsed in a couple of slides the most important things that are not records, that are not initially Init, and so on. So not the very first stop that Matt's already talked about. And the new era has come also because the framework has changed a lot. So if your application is .NET Framework based, of course you can keep it going. I mean, there is nothing that is preventing you from continuing to do maintenance and so on. But my point on the .NET Framework is, there is no application that needs no maintenance at all for many years. I mean, an application that is not evolved is substantially dead. And you may not want to leave your application die for that reason. So improving the application and migrating to new frameworks is a kind of evolution, and from which you can take a lot of advantages. And also the way the packaging like NuGet environment is working now, it's much easier when you go to .NET 5 in terms of productivity, on numbers of available, and so on. And frankly, after seeing the benchmark in the ASP.NET Core 5, which is now the fastest framework, frankly, I would not want to skip a free lunch in terms of speed that comes application without doing substantially anything, if not migrating. And also the new world of open APIs, Walker OData, gRPC, and so on. There are many other frameworks coming, the reverse proxy stuff, and there are so many new initiatives that are coming that you don't want to miss it. And so that's important. Another point is that the Windows development is going to get a big boost again. I mean, you may trust in Windows developer or not. It depends from which side are you on from. I mean, if you come from the web development, probably you are not very interested in that. But if you are for deploying application like business application and enterprise application, maybe Windows development is very, very useful to you. We had a discussion in the last years in .Next about Windows development and how to see the future of WPF or UWP and so on. And we will take a brief discussion on this later on. And then also the .NET container size and the .NET size itself has shrink. And then we will see the deployment option, how improved on that. And finally, the diagnostics. So let's begin to all of when we talk about C#9, please don't just stop at the main features. There are, for example, new types. There are an int and an uint that are very important when you come to interoperability stuff. They are pretty similar to int_ptr, for example, which is platform dependent. So they are 32-bit on 32-bit platform and on the other platform. But you may want to leverage it for optimization like code that you know that is important. There is also a system half, which is a 16 floating point type, which was introduced substantially because in machine learning, there are many calculations that require small floating point size. And you may not want to take a large amount of memory busy for this reason. So having a smaller floating point size is important to constrain the usage of memory. Also, we have other functionality things, I mean, productivity things that is very important, like Lambda discards. You can finally discard the members of the Lambda if you don't have to use it. And the syntax is pretty easy. You can avoid local capture, something that I really, really love because, for example, Lambda in us require like explicit capturing. And when it comes from for C#, I was very scared to have the ability to automatically capture all the locals. But as soon as you put static there, you of course don't have the accessibility to the locals, and you have the guarantee that you are entering and your code is simpler, is more performant because it doesn't capture this pointer anymore. Also, we have target type new. You may have seen that in a few sessions, which is I mean, nothing big, but definitely very useful, very productive when you're working with fast typing code, and you, of course, start with the type, then write strings new, and then you write a list of string, and then go with home and replace list of string with var in order not to repeat twice. I mean, it's a kind of maniac type of typing things on the keyboard. You can finally put on local functions, which is very useful when you want to constrain the use of local function to debug builds with conditional, for example, the conditional attribute. It's super for this purpose. And there is another optimization feature with this, which is the skip locals init attribute. This is very useful when you don't want to initialize the arrays that are allocated with the stack alloc. And it's useful, of course, because we have a 10K of memory. And if you know you are very, very you can declare that you are not going to use for read the array before having initialized it in any way, and you're making some interop. Of course, this operation is better because you are not going to zero the entire array. So this is just to say, please go beyond the big ones. of C# 9. There are many other things that are worth investigating. Probably this is the medium importance, but there is still one thing that I really, really love, which is the covariant returns. This is huge. I mean, let's say you have an interface, iArchive, and you have some derived classes with blah, 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 something that is implementing the stuff from iArchive. Okay, then you have a storage, and you return, of course, the iArchive, a single or several enumerable. And once you do that, you cannot, you could not file archive or memory archive from those, but you had to return iArchive. By the way, this is what's happening massively inside the Roslyn code base, which I am making a pull request in these days, by the way. And IEnumerable file archive is now possible thanks to C# 9. Of course, it's possible for covariant types, so IEnumerable, and have to experiment it because it's, in my opinion, it resolves a number of big issues that were not possible in the past. So let's the general picture of .NET 5 is that basically .NET is the future of the .NET platform at all. It is core, so when you hear .NET 5 is .NET core, of course. And the pity is that .NET Framework will not get C# features, at least they are not supported. So some of them it's possible to be used, but frankly, it's not something that you may want to, because there are features inside that are needed for the language in order to work properly. So .NET is the new name for .NET Core, and .NET Standard. What about it? At this point, .NET Standard is definitely still useful. If you authoring a library for the broad public, you may want to publish it either only or even in addition to the specialized libraries as .NET Standard, because otherwise it is not possible to use it from framework. And you should remember that the last .NET Standard version that is supported from .NET Framework is 2.0. It's not 2.1, it's 2.0. And then if you instead are working with your own ecosystem, you want to leverage the library only from .NET 5 and .NET 3.1, you are probably getting a better experience in targeting directly those libraries, because you have more APIs available, of course, because the .NET Standard is constrained set of API. And finally, we have seen that .NET 5 is a kind of framework that is evolving, and they started a big reunion of all the frameworks, and the Mono, Xamarin, and .NET Core runtimes will merge in .NET 6. They already began this by merging most of the repositories, but the final work will happen in .NET 6. So stay tuned. The .NET is very bright from this perspective. One of the things that are very, very important is that now with the TFMs, you can finally not only declare the kind of the version of .NET, of course, as it always happened, like .NET Core App 3.1, but you can also specify in the TFM the SDK that you are using. You see the difference between the target framework in 3.1 and 5. This is really the SDK now, that before it was not addressed inside the property group here, but just references and external packages. Now this is option. You don't have to specify the contracts of this SDK manually. and here are the supported versions, of course, but just in a single line in the target framework. And the minimum supported OS platform give you exactly what is the minimum windows you want to address. So you can definitely use a modern SDK, a newer SDK, and say, hey, I am ready to go with Windows 7, okay? Because many of you, I know that you have a Windows 7, even if you should not, okay? And how can you be prepared to support Windows 7 if there is a new API that is not supported in there? And the answer is that you have to check for yourself, of course. You have the ability to check the operating system at runtime that is currently running on. And you have to check, and you will give out, sorry, this API is not supported. For example, the location platform is not supported, or otherwise you get an external library, or you say, this is only Windows 10 features, and you can not go there. But you can definitely run on older operating system. This is very good. Let's see for a moment and a brief example of this in this application. So this is a consumer console, and you see a .NET 5. Okay, this is one of the version of the SDK that are supported. But let's go straight to the WPF, which is far more interesting. For example, this is not more needed, so Windows Desktop is obsolete now. You can go back to the dear old Microsoft Net SDK. You just specify this. By the way, you can also just avoid specifying the version, and you can just say Windows, of course. It depends from the APIs that you want to use. And then when you run your application, you will have the advantage to be able to use automatically all the projections for the modern APIs that have been added over the years, thanks to WinRT inside the Windows 10. And this means that I have the platform location platform and the RSS feed, for example, to read the RSS, something that didn't exist before the WinRT, just to be clear. And the way you use this stuff is extremely simple, because you can see from here, apart a long list of usings, the geolocator is just making new of the geolocator and getting the position async. You don't have to bother with the WinRT stuff or the asynchronous things and convert to task and so on. So the projection is so neat in comparison to the previous one. This is huge. And also you see the syndication client for taking the RSS is super easy. And this is one of the most important points. Of course, this is about headless APIs, okay? What does it mean? The headless APIs are those that are not using the UI, so you are not interacting with the UI. If you want to use the UI, you have to leverage the new WinUI, which is now the version 3, preview 3, which it was just released at the preview 3 a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks ago, and you have an VSIX in Visual Studio that you get the new preview templates. There is a small issue with NuGet, but it's nothing that preventing you to run the application. You get a lot of things. You get a lot of controls. You get a lot of things that are very useful. And among those, which I believe the swap chain panel is a killer feature, by the way, because I love the ability to interact with DirectX, with C++, and so on. You also have, you also have the Webview. And let's see for a moment what all of this means. First of all, if you want to experiment with UI, you have to just run the official application that is a kind of demonstration about all the controls that are there. And you have also the sources, of course, it's on GitHub, and you can use every single control of the WinUI. You can see the source code, the C# source code is very easy to use and to experiment with that. And another things that I want to show you is that the templates generate these applications, okay? I didn't touch the application absolutely. This is the default one, so it's just a button on the screen. But if you run it using the package, because this is a UWP application, you get the packaging, and then you have an application. This is what is giving you the WinUI template, and you can start adding XAML stuff and so on. You may wonder, but I want to stay with WPF, for example. Yes, you will be able to. There will be XAML island coming. You should see the roadmap to see what's happening there. And the other point that is normally comes to a question is, what about cross-platform? I mean, this is WinUI, but I want to leverage the cross-platform things. Well, even if it's WinUI, it's definitely possible. In fact, during the discussion that is on YouTube, Kevin Gallo clearly said, okay, we want to hear from you guys. So if the community asks for WinUI to go cross-platform, they will. So please vote here. And it just depends on you. You have to increase the number of votes, and we will get something that can go cross-platform, and it will be definitely very interesting. Also, another thing that I want to show you is the Webview tool. And this time the demo is pretty much very interesting, because it's not just a normal default web page, but I wanted to understand how versatile was the Webview, the new Webview tool. This is, by the way, an application where I built a small tabbed control, because by default, the web UI is just a XAML tag, nothing more. And we can go on .next graph, okay? And you see that. This is a control that I created, and the web UI is the inner border. So it's something without buttons, without address bar, which is extremely simple to do, without the tab, without the X, and so on. So if you want, you can go and open this. And I had to manage the event that wants to open a new window, because that button opens a separate window, not tab. And I created an additional tab for this reason. And also, as soon as I load the page, I use the HTML agility pack in order to grab the content of the HTML and find all the links. So for example, we have Twitter here. And when we go to Twitter, you know that the loading is asynchronous, so you will not see any link here, because when the load is complete, there are not many links. There are many more links here, of course, but they are loaded asynchronously, so you don't see that immediately, but you can modify the source code if you want. And also, we can go to the past editions, for example, of Peter, okay? And that's it. And we have all the needed stuff. We have the back button. Of course, here there is no back, but we can go back here. Of course, we can refresh. As you see, it's all very neat. And the goal is that you can add your application for SVG, for example, SVG support, because it supports OpenGL with the WebGL. You can have specific video stuff, because HTML5 support video stuff. This is the new edge based Chromium based engine. And consider that this application was made just with few lines of code, because here you have very few things. So the main window is super simple, and my control is made from this custom control that, of course, override the tab item. And there is just the management of the basic events of the browser, okay? And then the header, the tab header, and the navigation bar with the buttons, nothing more. But it's complete. And I want to use this application to see how difficult is publishing this guy. And we will see it later. So we have seen a lot of things. We can publish for the SDK of Windows. We can go and use the new APIs for WinRT. But after all, you may wonder, okay, that's nice. It's Microsoft. They did it all internally. And what about me? I have my own things. So what's the magic behind accessing the Windows SDK? I already had the possibility to use com stuff and so on. And you have to be very, very happy, because everything changed. So the old support for WinRT has been removed. Yes, has been removed from .NET. Okay, now the entire projection from C++ and the WinMD stuff to C# has been completely rewritten from scratch. And what's the new? Because I want to use that as well. So I want to give you a glimpse of this. I cannot spend too much time, but I can promise you that if you love this topic as I do, I can bring a brand new session from St. Petersburg, for example, next year, and go into deeper details. But I want you to give a glimpse of this because it's pure magic. So the basic point is the CS WinRT NuGet package, which is still in progress. I mean, it's not completed. It's ready. Yes, they released the version, but if you see the number of commits is incredible, huge. Okay, I am following very closely this. It's basically a code generation in a library. It's the ability to consume and produce WinRT components. So it's basically, they have metadata as it existed before in comms, let's say, but it's the new contract, the WinRT. And they read this and generate the code. And those generators is not just the C# one, but there is CPP WinRT, there is Rust also, there is Python that is work in progress. Okay, so we will have the ability to work, the interact between any couple of language. And it's because having several languages and having the ability to mix them without too many effort is huge. And this generates the C# code projection, so that I am fine with making a new of a class, okay, as you see with the geolocation before. But I don't want to mess with the activation that stays behind it. So behind that new, they generate an activation, a create instance, let's say. And the component appears as it was .NET code, but it isn't, okay? And it's normal because it was C++ with WinRT. You cannot do that. And I don't want to mess my code with the interoperability stuff. All this stuff is widely used in Microsoft, is the main point on WinUI, for example, but there are additional places. There is just another feature that I want to talk about in C#9 that made this NuGet package possible. And this also, remember, replaced the old projection generator, which has been deprecated and removed from .NET, okay? And the big feature that is in C#9 are the function pointers. And this is extremely important and widely used inside CS WinRT to create those projections. You will recognize, okay, it's a function pointer, I know, because it's marked as delegate, but delegate star, so it's a pointer. Then you have unmanaged, okay? So you have to be unsafe, of course, that's obvious. There is the calling convention, and finally we will see we want to publish one of my method in C# as a C function, okay? C declaration. Then we have the template here that the generics that have the same shape of the func. So we have 3 parameters in input and 1 in output. And one of these is the pointer to a buffer, okay? That's very simple. And then you will say, okay, my export is this guy. And the C# method that realizes the implementation of the function that is directly exported to the public is this, with the calling convention cdecl, of course. And then we have the 3 input and 1 output, and we have the implementation. And this is straightforward and huge. So what's the difference with the dear old reverse pinvoke, which I used massively in the past? It allows exporting function to the native world. It removes the needs of creating a delegate instance, so you don't have to make all the stuff. And most importantly, listen, reduce the cost of the runtime calling and the transition to GC cooperative directly. It's automatic. You don't have to do anything. And finally, the pointers point directly to the native code generated from the JIT. So this is a number of improvements that make your life easier, and you can finally export C# to the external world easily. Of course, you still need the core CLR. You cannot go and load a library with load library in C++ and go. You have to get an host because you need the CLR. But I will explain eventually this in another session in the future. Let's breathe for a moment because this is huge. You know what? I will show you a piece of demo on that because I don't see your faces, of course, which is a bad thing. But I feel that you may want to see something that will replace C++ CLI in the future. I have this nice feature here. This is the generated code, but oh my God, what is and you know, this is a default code where I see my Visual Studio is hiding me some of the files, unfortunately. Show all, please. Okay, that's it. Sorry, but you know the filter stuff. We have here the implementation, and I took this function from one of my previous work in C++ to run a process with the low privilege mandatory level. So it's a low integrity level. And I wanted to use this C++ function. So I generated a projection. I cannot show you all the details of there because we get late. And then we have a client. And the client just referenced the projection. And we have here all the stuff. So I will create a notepad as a low integrity level. And this low integrity level means that you basically cannot do anything. And if I run the Process Explorer, you will see that this notepad instance is running at low integrity level. Let's go at the very end, notepad, and you see low here, which is something that is used basically from browsers. If I go to document, I try to save a file. Oh, I cannot. You want to go to the documents? Yeah, I'm already in the documents. You cannot because it's low integrity. You cannot save in documents, and that's it. So it's pure fun. This is just an example, and let's go beyond. If you are instead a web developer, you want to leverage the new System.Text.Json. You know that Newtonsoft JSON is great. His creator works in Microsoft now. and everything is fine, but I mean, for compatibility purposes, we need a better and more performant library. So I don't want to show you how to serialize a type because there are plenty of examples there, but I want to focus on the best features that you can get from there. And this is the new library do support immutable types. So records and structs that are immutable. Okay, that's it. They simply works. They recognize the constructor. Okay, the default constructor is used. You can instruct the serializer to choose a specific constructor, whereas there are more than one. And that's good. I opened an issue on this because if you have a record with multiple constructors, it still doesn't work. They will fix it. So, I mean, we are growing. Let's go on. Don't serialize the default types. For example, if you want more compact JSON types, you want to avoid serializing the last name if it's null, okay, or an integer if it's 0, and so on. You want to allow using a private setter, okay? If I want my serializer use this, it can. You have a JSON that has more data than your properties, no problem. They will go in a dictionary, and that's all. And you want also to serialize circular references, which was the primary reason for not using System.Text.Json at the beginning. Now you can, and so we are there. I mean, it's working very nicely. What about the performance? This is what allowed ASP.NET Core to go that fast. And you can see here in .NET 5 serialization, and the same test under .NET 4.8, you can see that, I mean, I want to compare text.json here with text.json here. I want to go with .NET 5 personally. I don't know you, but for me, there is no question. And on the serialization, it's pretty much the same. You can see this is much performant. And also here, the gap, I mean, no way. I definitely want to go in that direction and adopt the new library. So let's go now to the topic of prepare for publishing. We already know that in .NET Core 3, we had a number of options. And I presented this in DotNext, it was last year. That's fine. I mean, we already have self-contained, which is the very most important thing when you want to use the other options. You have to choose a runtime identifier, otherwise you cannot go self-contained, of course. You may choose to go with a single file, which is useful, but it's different. It's not the same single file of last year. They optimized the way they chunk all the things together. In the past, it was kind of zipped and expanded at runtime, which it takes time at the bootstrap. Now it's different. They really merged the code all inside. Unless you add an option which can still zip some of the stuff which is not IL, for example, native libraries. And we will see that in a moment. Then trimming. And you can trim code that you don't use. For example, you want to trim the types that you are not using. This is very useful for Blazor, for example. When you go in a WebAssembly, you don't want to waste sites because you are very constrained. So this is the default option. And also, if you need to have a very fast bootstrap of your application, you can even ahead of time precompile your application into native code. And this also has been improved in many ways. Finally, if you don't want to go with CS Proj but just publish with that, you have the command line of the option we have seen there, and this include native libraries for self-extract. Basically means that the native libraries are embedded and then expanded at runtime. I will show you an example. which is all these tests, all these application I deployed in several ways. This is without the include native library, okay? And if you go into the any CPU, so the basic application, you see that, okay? And what the single file does is giving you the browsing. Of course, the native library are expanded there, so that they cannot be embedded. And you see also the Webview loader, okay? But if you specify that, you can go to the other folder and single file, and you have the browsing exe. So our browsing application that we have seen before, it's a browser, multi-tab browser, with just a single file. I'm shouting .next, yeah. And you see, it's amazing. I mean, we have exactly the same functionalities in a single file with all the publishing things that we have seen. But there is more. And this more is that we can trim more. We can trim more than just the entire types. We can trim just the members that you use. So we can just trim unused members. And okay, it trims the R2R images, so the ahead of time, unless you use publish ready to run. And since this is an experimental feature which is in use only in Blazor at the moment, you may want to pay very attention when you use it. You have to retest entirely all the things because, of course, it can be produce bad results, and in fact, it doesn't work by default with WPF and WinForm, but they are working on it. And how they are working on it? They are working on it because they are using a new hosting. We will talk in a moment. Another things that you can do is trimming not just the types you are not using, but entire .NET features. And those features are categorized here. And you know what? I have a small demo for this, which is extremely interesting because we can have this application which use some resources. So basically it throws exceptions, and we will see in a moment the default messages, okay? Those are the messages that are embedded in the system libraries. Oh, sorry, I want to, yeah, it was correct, sorry. So basically we have the use system resources is enabled, is a feature that is enabled, which is the default, by the way, and you can see these messages, which are the default one. And also you can see that the Japanese way to format the date is the expected one. But if I go in my CS project and run the application again after putting through those that are also in the table of the slide, I get a different behavior, of course. And you can see that the features are here disabled, and you get just the keys for the exception, but not the message, because you reduced the size of the trimmed version, and this is formatted, so the not localized stuff was removed. It is used just the invariant culture, and the date is wrong, of course. It's up to you. If you want to remove some stuff and format on your own, you can have less sites and have those features removed. I mean, it's you that have to decide whether it's worth the pain to remove the feature that you don't use. And there are many. I mean, in the slides, you can also decide to go with the binary formatter, the unsafe UTF-7 encoding, which, by the way, will be removed in the next release of the framework, and so on, and many others. So in order to improve the situation, a new superhost is scheduled for .NET 6, which statically will link from the C++ perspective inside your application everything, and will use the the native library statically linked. This will reduce the size, will be cross-platform friendly because it's a super host that will take the necessary precaution to understand what code is needed and what is not, and also will reach a goal that is super asked from a ton of time. I remember these questions from the very first day of .NET in before 2000 when it was in beta. So the goal is, for example, total removal of the IL language. This means that your will be obfuscated. Of course, you can disassembly everything also from C++. So it's a protection that is you should evaluate. But at least you don't have the IL. It will be much harder for anyone to disassemble your code to reflect on your code. And this gives you the smallest binary file size, of course, and the fastest possible startup time because everything is super compiled from the beginning. That's what they are working on in this moment. I made all the tests. I don't want to discuss with you. I want to leave to you this slide with all the numbers, with the default console, the default web app, the default WPF, and the my WPF browser, which doesn't work with trimming, you know. So I have published with the various option combination. The most important, in my opinion, and the one with the dot, with the red dot, okay, and the one that I believe are the most important. You have to compare that with the any CPU, which is the default publishing, and decide if it's worth or not each of that. So we can also discuss this later on the discussion zone. Finally, for my session, I want to give you a very good news. The super cool diagnostic tool, .NET Trace, has now a very nice feature which just runs your process from the very beginning so that you can, of course, make a performance analysis even on the bootstrap, which is super important. But the most important thing is that now you can understand the fusion process. The fusion process, if you don't know, is the one that is loading assemblies. Okay, so you will have a full trace of all the assemblies that are looked for on the disk. If you don't find it, it will be marked that you find not found, of course, and you know exactly what are the files that have been loaded in your process at the very beginning. So this is very, very important and super easy to do. What else you can do? With the new diagnostic, you also can capture a dump on Linux and analyze it on Windows. And this is super cool because, of course, the dump analysis, we discussed this in several conversations and in open conversation with other speakers. And I mean, it was very hard in the past to make an analysis just on Linux just before, because the dump was created on Linux. They heard, they listened to us. And I mean, for example, Christoph was one of the guy that asked this several times. And finally, you can capture ELF dumps on macOS as well. So, are there any questions for me? I hope you enjoyed the session. I want to thank you. I am remembering you the discount for the book. And Andrei or Roman, please.
How it works.
It's okay?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not muted. I guess I muted it. I'm just not sure how my connection.
I can hear you now.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Okay, let me turn off the camera because I guess here is still some connection problems. I would just turn it off. Maybe just sound would work. Okay. Yeah, great. Actually, right now we had just one question, so please, guys, don't hesitate to ask questions in chat. I will tell everything, and also you could ask in Russian. I will translate. So the question now was, what is your favorite feature in UC#?
In C#, well,
Yeah.
I am currently using a lot the record because it gives me a lot of code that otherwise I should read it manually. But beyond that, I mean, the ability to have the covariant returns really trigger me on. I mean, it's one of the features that I loved most when I started studying the early previews.
Okay, by the way, I had a question on this, talking about C# and all the syntax updates. How do you think, do C# really need any new syntax updates? Because a lot of people just tell that C# is overloaded with features and have too much of them and so on. So how do you think, do we even need any new syntax updates?
I mean, it's not something that you have to use. It's just something that you may feel more comfortable when you want to use because you want to write less code. The basic idea is that there is a competition and between programming languages. We know that from Stack Overflow that yearly publish the statistics of adoption of C# and how much every language developer is happy or not about its own language. And of course, Microsoft is listening to that, and they want to make life easier and give you the instruments, the tools that leave you give you the possibility to write code with few lines of code, express your intent with the fewest lines of code that are possible. Said that, if you don't want to use a given feature, well, there are many that are not mandatory. Let's say, I mean, there are certain features are very important, but others are not fundamental. We have seen in one of my very first slides that some of them are just I mean, syntactic sugar, if you want, but definitely something that can be useful.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I absolutely agree, but the discussion is always between two options, like give a language as much possibilities as possible to make it as powerful as possible, and let the programmer decide which he wants or don't want to use it. And the other option is to give language a minimal required set of features. And there's languages who are hardly on it, like Go, try to be, not really right now. There's languages who are trying to do the opposite. For example, Kotlin is this kind, and yeah.
Yeah, but there is one point that I want to underline from this perspective, which is not often the main point, but is super important. You may know from my previous session in DotNext that I am a huge fan of code generation. And code generation is gaining a lot of consensus in the whole world because we want to just express the main concept, and we don't want to waste time and hours in writing code that can be automatically generated. Said that, if you have a very expressive, if you have a syntax that let you express in few lines of code a big concept, that will make the life easier for code generators, or at least for people like me that writes the code generators. And this means that you don't have to produce a lot of code. You don't have to produce those huge abstract syntax trees to express something, but in less code, you express the same concept.
Yeah, absolutely agree. By the way, source generators is good for this purpose. And yeah, also I always had the discussion with Java developers, like why C# don't have something like Lombok. Actually, mostly just because we don't need. I mean, maybe for some features, but mostly we don't, just because language makes all the generations itself. Okay. Also, there was a question. Could you please share your demo project on C#, C++.NET, and C++.NET interaction?
The one on the C++ I'm still working on, but I can promise you that I will propose a session on this for the future. I mean, it's not very stable because there are issues at the moment with the CS WinRT library. There are many issues opened on their side. So it's currently working, but I mean, it should be explained with details in order to avoid the problems. So I beg your pardon, but at the moment I prefer to not to share it. But
okay, yeah,
if you want to see it during the, if you want to have a discussion with me about that, absolutely, you can also contact me privately when we can discuss it. I am absolutely open to it. It's not just because I don't want to release the source, but I can explain to people how it works.
There was another questions on C#9 from Andrei. The first one was, are there features in new C#9 that seems as mistakes to you? And the other question is kind of connected, is what is the worst feature in entire C# you think? For example, yesterday for this question, Matt talked about the ugly delegates API.
Oh, the worst, in my opinion, were the very first decision to make the operators static, which is impacting a lot because I want to put constraints on the operators. I want to use operators in the constraints. I mean, the inability to use them with generics is very important. I mean, I started from my previous language was C++, of course, and this means that I feel the need to redefine the operators very often, and this is something that is not very good. On the other side, I have to say that Mads is trying to fix the situation you have seen in the session yesterday with the new changes in the interfaces, and well, let's see. I mean, there is a big discussion every time you touch the interfaces. It's a scaring matter. I mean, we have seen last year when we talked about the default implementation in interfaces have opened a lot of discussions. So that's it. And my favorite is complicated because probably the immutable types in general. So having read-only structs and so on is huge. At the moment, I want to I use them quite often because give me I feel safe when I know that that type cannot be touched anymore. It's fun, yeah.
Also, there was a question, like a first part of the question, is there any feature in C#9 that seems like a mistake for you?
Yeah, in C#9. In C#9, I would say, you think? No. I mean, if we think to C#8, we can discuss on the default interface members, but and I believe that there is something good about that. We discussed this stuff last year, and during a discussion zone, we had like 1 hour discussion on that matter, and a good discussion, by the way. I love that. But on the new stuff, I mean, it's good. We can probably, the feature that I guess people is not liking too much are the new int and nuint types, because they are platform dependent, and most of the C# guys want to stay far away from the platform dependent stuff. But we need performance. And when you go to WebAssembly and Android and Windows and Linux and so on, at the very end, you need those stuff. There is nothing to do.
Yeah, I agree. Another question from chat is Webview 2 is faster than UH based on Chromium.
So is the Webview faster than Chromium?
Than UH, that is
okay.
Chromium based.
Given the test that I made as user, I can say no. In my opinion, they are pretty much the same. In certain cases, I see the edge loading slower, but I mean, maybe it depends from several other things. The demo I've shown today is faster, is definitely much faster, just because it's not a full-featured browser. That's it. So basically, I just use the Webview in several tabs, but nothing more. So it is definitely faster.
Okay. By the way,
and also
you're talking about...
You can see that
sorry.
The view creates a folder with all the stuff that Chrome normally does in your application. So every time you can kind of reset your navigation by deleting this folder, and the browsing starts from scratch. You don't have any more cookies or anything. So it's very private. This one, it's a kind of in private navigation. It's very cool.
Okay. And you told a lot in your talk about some improvements for Windows development. And how do you think how actual it is now to have like just Windows development stuff? Because, for example, I as a developer trying to write as cross-platform code as possible, even in case if I'm not thinking of any other platforms than Windows right now. And actually, I myself just developing on Mac. So how do you think how actual it is and how actual it would be?
Okay. In the very first day, I was in Los Angeles to see the first edition of Build, where they presented Win 8 and the new Metro stuff and so on. I carefully listened to the WinRT presentation. And the WinRT is a very huge feature that is super important, because let you express APIs in terms of components and with metadata that exactly tells you something more about the APIs, rather than a C contract, which is pretty useless. I mean, everything must be done by hand. You have to use pinvokes and so on. And they built an infrastructure over WinRT, which was not very attractive. I mean, the whole UWP story is bad. You see, the people don't like it, because not just because it's constrained, because not all applications don't need so many superpowers to get the administration and or what else, but just because the application layer was not the correct one. But now with the project reunion, they said, okay, we were wrong. They recognized the error. We are making a totally different story. So we want those APIs, both the headless and the UI. So there is a big difference between the ones that are without UI and there are the other ones that are with UI. And we want to make them available to everyone, from the desktop to maybe the UWP if you want to be constrained, and others. That said, I made at that time, 1 year later, I guess, why aren't you bringing the WinRT concepts cross-platform? Because I want to use that contract, that way of interfacing languages cross-platform. And as a matter of fact, this is definitely was the initial plan. And if you go to the CPP WinRT, you will find that cross-platform is something scheduled. And again, what's the next step? In my opinion, is that WinUI should immediately get rid of the name WinUI, embrace the cross-platform, and be one big framework that can be used both on Windows and on the other operating system. Otherwise, the desktop is lost. This is my personal opinion. And if you want to vote, I added that slide of the voting on purpose. You have to go to GitHub and say, please, we want that. We want to go cross-platform with that. Because otherwise you have to go with either with C++, I mean Qt, either with maybe in the future with Xamarin-like stuff, but it's not very clear how cool will be the ecosystem. Either with React Native, maybe yes. I mean, I am working also with
Raffaele,
React Native.
I'm really sorry for
Yes.
the interruption, but we have only 30 seconds left. So I invite, thank you very much for the awesome talk. I invite you and all of the developers who watched us online to the discussion zone in Zoom. And it's time to close our conference. So it was the final talk. Thank you very much again. And now we are going to watch the conference closing.
Okay.
Oh, I have an updated information. We have 2 more minutes before the closing.
Okay. Okay. So my last words are: please do go on GitHub on the WinUI that was on my slide and vote for having that cross-platform if you care about desktop development. And that will be very productive. At the very beginning, it was not very important to have a cross-platform UI, but nowadays, of course, yes. I mean, as a developer, I want to write the most profitable code. I mean, if I can write an application and this can run cross-platform, why not? I mean, even if there is 1% of my users that will use that on Mac or on Ubuntu, why not? That's it. Roman, are you still there?
Okay, thanks again for the wonderful talk and for all the answers. I hope that this talk... oh, you have a nice Mac. Cool.
Yes, I have to... You know how much I care about the communities. So please, please be part of the communities. It's very, very important.
Yeah, thanks. It's very nice closing words. So I hope that a bright future with a ton of new features is expecting all of us. So let's continue in the discussion zone to discuss it.
Okay. Okay. Ciao.